EVO. Welcome back to The Devil Within. This is Acquainted with the Night Redux Part 2, and our continuing re-release of Season 1 in support of the MGM Plus docuseries Let the Devil In. All episodes now available to binge. Tell your friends, tell your family. And again, I want to thank everybody for the success of the show. It's doing really, really well, better than I could have hoped, and it's all because of you guys for getting out there and watching it and getting MGM Plus subscriptions and texting about it and reviewing it and commenting. It all helps tremendously, and I'm really grateful, so thank you. So I'm aware that last episode and a lot of the previous episodes have kind of turned into Poetry Corner with Branden. Not my intention. Poetry just really lights me up. It's a big part of my life. So when I start talking about it, I kind of go down these rabbit holes. Hope it's not too much. And so in part 2 of these episodes, there's no poetry. So there we go. What we are going to talk about in this episode, to begin with, is the rule of 3. Now, I spent a lot of time on that in the podcast and attributed a lot of Tommy's downfall to his discovery of the rule of 3. And if you watch the TV show, it's not mentioned at all, and for good reason. Can't prove any of it. What you've realized, I think, by watching the doc is that I was surrounded by some really serious professionals and journalists and people who had someone to answer to, like the network lawyers, and like, hey, we can't be sued for this. You can't just be saying shit if it isn't true. It's defamation or whatever. So I get it, and I'm grateful for that. And the story that I wanted to tell, I needed to come up with some impetus, some inspiration for Tommy to do what he did. Just so it makes sense in my head. And so I didn't just stop at, because he was a fucking monster and a lunatic and wanted to kill people in the name of the devil. That could be and is probably the truth. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to try and understand a little bit more and look, I'll admit it, to maybe try and a little bit excuse the behavior, because it was hard for me to believe that a contemporary of mine could do something like that. And I've talked about this before, and I'll talk about it more in the next episode. But for this episode, that was kind of my reasoning for digging a little deeper and trying to find something that could explain what piqued his interest and ritualistically what he would have had to have done to make all of this happen. And during my research, I read some fucked up books, man. And one of them, The Ritual Romanum, was interesting and kind of boring. But The Lesser Key of Solomon, man, like right away you're introduced to like 72 demons and what they're all about and what power they give you and how they're summoned from one plane into the next. It was really disturbing, and I'm just thinking, man, who wrote this fucking thing? And whew, man. But the rule of 3 is discussed in that, and there's a very specific reason as to why that jumped out at me, and it's another one of those dominoes that fell. It just seemed too coincidental to be a coincidence. I know that doesn't make sense, but like when I realized that the Jersey Devil sightings happened around the summer or the winter solstice, that was a weird kind of light bulb moment, and this was another one of them. So I'm reading about the rule of 3 and how sacred the number 3 is in the occult and pagan practices, and even in some Satanistic rituals. And the rule of 3 kind of writ large, we're all victims of it or subject to it. Like I said in the podcast, in our advertising, in our nomenclature, in our cliches, it's everywhere. The Three Musketeers, or, stop, drop, and roll, or stop, look, and listen. Like all of these, in comedy writing, the rule of 3 is everywhere. Next time you watch a sitcom, you'll see it's boom, 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 right? Set up, punchline. It's all rule of 3 stuff. And it also exists in the darker areas of the occult. And one of them was this ritual about I forget the Latin words right now. I'll remember them if I have a second. Intentio, animo, and oblatio. Intention, courage, and offering. The reason that jumped out is that while I was researching this and I was reading the Lesser Key of Solomon and I read all this stuff about the Rule of Three, it sparked a memory, a local memory, that I attributed incorrectly to Clinton Road, and I don't even remember where the place is now, but it's somewhere local to Jefferson. And the story was, if you go there at a certain day at midnight, and if you walk around, I think it's an abandoned church, if you walk around it 3 times, the first time you hear a bird chirp, the second time you hear a dog bark, and the third time, if you make it around, the devil appears to you. And then who knows what is supposed to happen? What, do you like hang out and go get a beer, or does he like fuck you up and kill you or steal your soul? Like, who knows? There was never an end to that story. There was never a resolution as to then what happens. And for the simple reason that no one ever made it that far. You know, again, it's the same thing like Clinton Road, when you're like, we're going to go out there and we're going to go to Cross Castle and you're so scared by the time you get there, you barely get out of the car. And so same thing with this place. Like no one ever walked around it, probably even 1.5 times, because your mind would just play tricks on you. And even if you don't hear a bird chirp at midnight, your brain tells you that any sound is, oh my God, that was a bird chirping. If I keep going, the devil's going to do something terrible. So no one ever did it. And it was like a dare, and and I was never out there. My brother told me all this. And so that's where I got the walking around the sacred site 3 times. Not only was it mentioned in the research materials that I was reading, with those 3 distinctions placed on each circumnavigation of the site: intention, courage, and offering. The first time around, you introduce your intention. The second time around, you prove your courage. And the third time around, you make the offering. In terms of a summoning practice, when we're talking about a demon that you're calling into this world, that's one of the ways to do it according to this literature. So at this point, I'd very clearly taken the stance that Tommy fucked around and found out when it came to summoning the devil. That's the conceit of the story that I was building it on, that yes, he was actually possessed by a demon. And this is how that happened. And of course, this is as conjecture gets when you're writing something that begins as a relatively serious investigative podcast, and then halfway through it starts becoming more of a horror story and like a mystery story. But it's a story I wanted to tell. And the reason that I included things like this was only because I got all lit up when I find some arcane bit of research that dovetails incredibly well with a local legend. And I went, okay, man, the boys back home are gonna understand what I'm writing about. Remember, I wasn't writing for the audience that wound up finding the story. I was writing for like 20 of my friends back east that I was going to send it to. I really honestly didn't think that it was going to find the audience that it did. I mean, a 30-plus-year-old murder, I was as surprised as anybody. We'll just leave it at that. So the Rule of Three, with origins back in the earliest pagan practices and modern manifestations everywhere from advertising to meme culture and comedy writing. So that's the Rule of Three.
As Tommy dove deeper into the writings of Richard Cross, he made what almost proved to be a fatal mistake. Fatal to his plans, that is. There were a few passages in Latin from the grimoire that he was struggling with, and so he went to the only authority he trusted when it came to that long-dead language, his priest. You can imagine the scene. Young Tommy, altar boy, familiar face around the church, comes knocking on the door of the rectory with a few questions. He has a piece of paper in his hand with passages he's transcribed. The good father is only too happy to help, for Latin is the language of the church, and this boy's natural curiosity must be encouraged. The first phrase needing translation was omne trium perfectum, or every set of three is complete. Easy enough, right? The priest goes on to explain that it refers to what we know as the rule of three, which is basically an observation of the human psyche that explains our attraction to things, all things, that come in three. Words, numbers, jokes. The rule of three appears everywhere in our lives. From literature, we get the Three Musketeers, the Three Little Pigs, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future, King Lear's three daughters, Mark Antony's entreating of friends, Romans, and countrymen. Then there are the ubiquitous catchphrases such as stop, drop, and roll, Veni Vidi Vici, stop, look, and listen, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But somewhere during the priest's lesson on human psychology and the rule of three, he must have gotten worried. For soon after Tommy was dismissed from the rectory, his parents got a call from the church. Tommy was officially under observation, and it was suggested that all recent activity be investigated with special interest given to reading materials, musical interests, and new friends. What was it that spooked him so much? We can get closer to the answer when we examine a specific page from Tommy's grimoire, the page entitled The Rule of Three. Tommy apparently managed to get the translation he needed, and what he found seemed to be the antithesis of what someone would expect when it came to the business of ancient spells and summoning rituals. Nothing extravagant, nothing complicated. Everything was specific, clearly spelled out, and easy. There were words like locus, aura, and ritus, which beneath Tommy scrawled the English translation of these words: location, hour, ritual, followed by intentio, animo, and oblatio. Intention, courage, offering. What Tommy was able to do was pierce the shroud of secrecy that clouded the truth regarding the most dangerous rites of the ancient pagans, going all the way back to the first inhabitants of North America. He discovered that the necessary ingredients weren't ingredients at all. What was actually required was the correct location at the correct time and knowledge of the correct ritual. He now had that information because on the pages that followed in Cross's grimoire, there was an architectural drawing of a structure that Tommy knew in a glance: the castle ruins where he witnessed the Black Mass. That was the location. Cross also wrote about the celebration of Yule, which began on the exact moment of the winter solstice. That was the time. And finally, a ritual was described that connected all the remaining dots. A simple ritual that even a boy of 14 could easily do. It involved encircling the sacred location 3 times: intentio, animo, oblatio. The first circle announced your intention, the second circle proved your courage, and the third circle introduced your offering. On Tommy's next trip to the library, he had one book on his mind: The Farmer's Almanac. He needed to know when the winter solstice took place if he was going to achieve his ultimate goal. He learned that the approaching solstice was to be on the 22nd of December at exactly 10:45 p.m. According to his writings, this information gave Tommy only 2 short days to prepare, and to convince Lance to go with him. Lance was growing increasingly apprehensive of Tommy and his cavalier attitude toward the mysterious powers of the occult. Understand, it was Tommy's intention to disprove the existence of any type of dark power, demonic possession, or any of the other fantastic assertions made by the true believers of paganistic practices. This was all an intellectual exercise for Tommy, a game. He saw it as a way to blow off some steam, to engage in a little teenage rebellion, and, in a truly exceptional way, to underscore his own faith in what he believed to be the true God, the God of Abraham. It worked out that Tuesday the 22nd was the last day of school before Christmas break, so it was easy for Tommy to arrange for his friend Lance to sleep at his house. There was some resistance from his parents. no doubt due to their priest's warnings about any new friends. But Lance was welcomed into the Sullivan home, as he always had been, and Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan fell asleep to the soothing, familiar sounds of their children laughing, talking, and watching television in the bedrooms down the hall. They would never have believed what their oldest son had planned for the evening.
And another interesting thing, my first day on the set making the television show, one of the directors came up to me and we were talking, and he was kind of bummed that all of the Richard Cross, Clinton Road, possession, demon summoning, rule of three stuff, that there wasn't enough there to corroborate, to include in the doc series. And what he really wanted to explore was Tommy's alleged incorrect translation of the Latin word oblatio. Tommy understood it to mean offering, when the more accurate translation within the context of what he was doing was sacrifice. In the story version, I painted Tommy as a tourist, someone who didn't really believe in anything that was going on, devout Catholic, believes in the power of God over the devil, and that all of this possession stuff was kind of nonsense. He was testing it and didn't understand that it was real, and that as he circled the sacred site by the third time, what he thought was an offering was actually he was committing to a massive sacrifice of himself and his family. And so I had the character Lance have this explained to him by the priest. Now, of course, we have no idea if that happened. I thought that was an interesting turning point, an interesting kind of fulcrum where things shifted in the story and things got really, really serious and things were about to get even more serious. This director, a friend of mine, was really interested in exploring the tragedy of that. Like, man, what if he had known? What if he had gotten the right translation? Could he have pumped the brakes a little bit on that? So all of those what ifs, not just in this story, but in any story, hell, in our own lives. The what ifs can keep you up at night. The what ifs can spell the difference between life and death, or happiness and sadness, or fortune or ruin. So the what ifs are always fun to explore. We just didn't get to in the TV show because, again, they were being responsible filmmakers. And I was left unsupervised to make the podcast. And so maybe that's why things work. You need different levels of discipline sometimes, and you'll get different angles of the same story. That's one way to look at it, I guess. But the bottom line question, I guess, that a lot of people have asked is, was Tommy actually out at Clinton Road, specifically at the Cross Castle ruins, at the times that I placed him there in the podcast? We don't know. Doesn't mean yes, doesn't mean no. My opinion is that it's more likely than not that he was, which is why I included that in the story. And that is based on eyewitness accounts. That is based on Tommy's own writings. That's based on police reporting and the knowledge that was discovered after the fact. That if you were local to Jefferson and if you had some proclivity or interest in Satanism or the occult, that's where you went. So we could work backwards and understand what was discovered in the hours after the discovery of Betty Ann's body was that Tommy was in fact a Satanist. No one knew that until 2 or 3 in the morning, the night of the murder, when the police did their investigation and went into his bedroom and went into the dad's car and found the contract. There were suspicions that we learned from Sister Philomena in the doc series that she had talked to the mom. Hey, keep an eye on your kid. There might be something going on. I hinted at that in the podcast where the priest gets suspicious and worried about Tommy. So I missed that in my research, but it's because a lot of people wouldn't talk to me. But it was actually Sister Philomena that became worried and mentioned something to Mrs. Sullivan. didn't do anything about it, but at least there was some level of concern. So again, I'll listen. We're never gonna know. But I'll stand by that. Tommy had a tremendously powerful interest that was newfound, and there's that phrase, there's no zealot like a convert. Tommy was a convert, and he jumped in head first. And going back to what I said, if you're local and if you have inside access to that world, which Tommy had allegedly through Lance's sister's boyfriend, hey, if you're into this, this is where we go and this is where we do stuff. So that's where he'd end up, out of Clinton Road. So that's the answer. Was he there? I would put it 60-40 in favor of him being there. Tommy was a smart kid, and he did his research. And I would say that by the week before Christmas, by probably December 20th, he'd figured out when the winter solstice was. He knew about the celebration of Yule in the pagan culture and what that meant, and that there was probably going to be some stuff going on out there at that time. And so I would say, did he go twice? Maybe, maybe not. Did he go once? I would say that's probably an 80% likelihood that he was out there, and if he did, it would have been on the winter solstice in 1987, December 22nd, 1987. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But we'll never know for sure. I just think it's more likely than not. So that'll do it for Acquainted with the Night Redux. Up next, Nothing Gold Can Stay. And if you think Johnny's interpretation of this poem from The Outsiders was on point, you wait. Oh, you wait. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please consider sharing it with family and friends. And make sure you're following The Devil Within wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, write a review, rate the show. Every bit of engagement with the algorithm helps. And check out the other shows across the EVO network. Taboo Treasures, Criminal Mischief, The Ides of April. I'm sure you'll find something you like. And please consider giving our sponsors some love. Quince, Mint Mobile, Mood Gummies, ExpressVPN. If it weren't for these great companies supporting the show, I wouldn't be able to keep making it. So I would appreciate your support there. Again, thanks for joining me. And until next time, stay safe out there. The Devil Within is an EVO production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm your writer and host, Branden Morgan.